Welcome to the Summer of Peace, a free global online event featuring leading peace builders sharing effective methods for taking inspired action and co-creating a new peace narrative. 11 Days of Global Unity is produced by the Shift Network in partnership with We the World. This event brings together brilliant changemakers making meaningful progress on critical issues, including interdependence, economic justice, human rights, and peace. We're grateful you're here. Please share this event with your friends and family. Plus join us on Facebook at the Shift Network. And now your host, Rick Olphick, founder of We the World and the We Campaign.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're joining us today. To reach me, Rick Olphick, and find out more about 11 Days of Global Unity, We the World, and the We Campaign, you can go to we.net. Today we are so very excited to open the 11 Days of Global Unity Telesummit with Marianne Williamson as we discuss the first of the 11 themes for change, unity. Marianne Williamson is an internationally acclaimed multiple best-selling author and lecturer who has been a popular TV guest on Oprah, Larry King Live, Good Morning America, and Charlie Rose. Project Angel Food, a Meals on Wheels program that Marianne founded in 1989 to serve homebound people with AIDS in Los Angeles, today serves over 1,000 people daily. And Marianne also founded a campaign to establish a United States cabinet-level Department of Peace. Marianne is a native of Houston, Texas, which has recently been devastated by torrential rain and floods. And I understand that Marianne lectures live every Tuesday night in New York City, and her talks are also live streamed. We'll give details about that later in our conversation. So, welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Telesummit, Marianne Williamson.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you. It's great having you.
Thank you.
So since our opening theme for the Telesummit is unity, and we have been seeing quite a bit of polarization in our society lately, how do you respond to the apparent increase in social and political tensions in the United States and also elsewhere that have continued since the 2016 presidential campaign? Would you say that achieving some degree of unity is important now in America? And is it even possible to achieve that kind of thing?
You know, there's more conversation about what divides us than there is about what unites us. We are united because on a spiritual level, we are one. But our task, living on the earth, is to bring our external material conditions into harmony with the internal truths. Now, when the United States was founded, the idea of the United States of America meant uniting South Carolina with North Carolina, with Georgia, Massachusetts, and so forth. So the differences between the states were what we would see today as not all that great. They were all agrarian societies. Most of them definitely were Christian. They had the same attitudes about men and women and so forth. Today, the United States has more to do with uniting intellectual states, emotional states, philosophical states, religious states. So the foundational principle of the United States that most matters here is called E pluribus unum, and that is out of many, one. And what is happening in the United States today is that people are overemphasizing one at the expense of the other. Some people just want the oneness, but when they're talking about the oneness, what they mean is one with people like me. Too many people are thinking in terms of the oneness of America as we should all be this. In too many cases, in really intolerant ways, we should all be white, or we should all be Christian, or we should all be whatever. But then on the other hand, there are those who emphasize diversity at the expense of our unity too. And the E pluribus unum means that both are important. So what is happening right now is that we have taken the notion of the rugged individualist, which is part of the high side of the American character, and we have taken it to a point where it is at the expense of the collective good. It's one thing that we all want to be individuals. That's great. You know, that is a good thing about America. We don't want to lose that spunk. We don't want to lose that entrepreneurial spirit. We don't want to lose that don't tread on me. That is a beautiful thing in the United States because it makes a lot of space for self-actualization, actually. But that e pluribus unum, that sacred balance in a civic sense, was always supposed to be between individual liberty and the concern for the common good. And we have become so focused on what I want at the expense of what is good for us. And I think all of us, probably each and every corner of the society, within every corner, needs to take a good look at that, including the higher consciousness community. Because the higher consciousness community also has been all about, you can have what you want. You can have what you want is not the spiritual mountaintop. Somebody told me yesterday that she saw a bumper sticker that said, all of us do better when all of us do better. So that is the consciousness that is the only sustainable consciousness for the 21st century, that we do realize that this is not just about you, this is about us. I was reading an article in the paper this morning about the floods in Houston, and it was talking about the fact that obviously it doesn't matter whether you're rich, whether you're poor, if the floods are there in front of your house. The flood's not thinking, you know, what's the rich neighborhood and what's the poor neighborhood. And if we do not make these evolutionary leaps into a more sustainable consciousness, then the karmic blowback will apply to all of us, no matter where we happen to be standing. Definitely,
definitely. And that's, you're getting to the core of what we're about with We the World and the We campaign. That is exactly embodied in what you're talking about. So, you know, these days I've noticed quite a bit of tension even between family members because they're on opposing political sides. So how can people emotionally and spiritually deal with their own anxiety and stress, seeing this social and political divisiveness and disunity in our society?
In a free society, we don't all have to agree with each other. Nobody owes it to you to agree with you. And that's the practice of democracy. So a lot of the times the work is within ourselves. Dear God, take away from me my judgment of this other person because they have the audacity to not agree with me. But what has happened in the United States, however, is that we used to have an unspoken agreement that there was a center, the borders past which you did not go. And within that center, there is liberal and conservative, there is libertarian, there is green. President Eisenhower said the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. But we had pretty much an agreement that had been forged that has recently come apart, and it's frightening, and it does produce anxiety for the correct reasons. And that is that we saw certain attitudes as beyond the fringe. You could be liberal, you could be conservative, you could be liberal, you could be libertarian, you could be green, you could be whatever, but it was understood that you were not a Nazi. It was understood that you were not suggesting institutionalized white supremacy. I mean, there you did not go. And so what is so anxiety producing today is that there are people speaking very loudly with loud megaphones, taking action, who exist and dwell with their politics and with their behavior outside the realm of what we used to be considered a kind of political norm, either to the left or to the right. On one hand, what do you do with the anxiety? You feel it because it is a very serious situation. But when it comes to just people who don't agree with you, there are a lot of people who don't agree with you. They're not Nazis, they're not KKK, they just don't agree with you. Their work is for you to do and to know that nobody has a monopoly on the truth. I think Eisenhower's line about the American mind at its best, both liberal and conservative, is very important. I'm certainly to the left of the of the line, but I learned a lot. I have a lot of respect for a lot of high-minded conservative values because high-minded conservative values and high-minded liberal values are both important, both the notion of personal accountability and concern for the common good. So that is work that we all have to do, not being so judgmental of people who don't agree with us. But when it comes to some of these outlying perspectives, which do go beyond the pale of what most of us consider righteous human thought and behavior, America, we have a problem. And that darkness will only be dissolved by our taking a much stronger stand for the light. What is the light? The light are our common first principles, that all men are created equal, that we are out of many, we are one, that our unity and our diversity matter, that the government is to broker the concern and care of the individual liberty and the concern for the common good, that we're to have freedom of religion in this country, that you do not have to agree with each other politically, that we should have to have free speech, that we will have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Those are our common first principles. And if we're not talking about those, you know, for a nation, justice for an individual, if you don't stand on principle, then you're going to be easily knocked down. And those principles, first of all, a lot of our students don't even take civics classes anymore. Too many Americans aren't even really aware of these sacred first principles. All men are created equal. That doesn't just mean people like you. All men are created equal. We are e pluribus unum, that we are many cultures, we are many ethnicities, but we are joined in common fealty. These are sacred. And when we just give them lip service or we don't even remember them, then we should not be so surprised that chaos erupts, because those principles are what unite us in a civic sense. It is spirit that unites us in an emotional, psychological sense. But those sacred first principles are sacred because they are emanations of divine consciousness, that we are all created equal. And remember, in the document it says, by God, God created all of us equal. I mean, these principles that are infused into our founding documents are in the most enlightened principles that have ever been embodied in the foundation of any nation on earth. And we understand the irony. We understand that many of the men who risked their lives to sign those documents were themselves slave owners. I mean, this has been true from the beginning. That dichotomy between those who were willing to work and to sacrifice, sometimes at the expense of their lives, to foster the embodiment of those principles by our nation. And there have been forces which would withdraw the resources of the nation from those first principles. I think it's very, very important that we revisit them right now, because the forces that would withdraw our commitment to them are definitely on the march.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. You know, I think I first became aware of the idea of spiritual politics when I was working with Michael Lerner back in the 1990s. He introduced the idea of the politics of meaning. You probably remember that. And Andrew Harvey talks about sacred or conscious activism. And at a certain point, my organization, We the World, was involved when you and Dennis Kucinich were promoting the U.S. Department of Peace. Then later, years later, you ran for Congress, and more recently, you did Sister Giant. All of these seem to be examples of the idea of spiritual politics.
I wrote a book about spiritual politics in 1998 called Healing the Soul of America, Healing of America, that renamed Healing the Soul of America. So I was certainly in there with that conversation. Don't leave the girl out, Rick. I called it yin activism, yang and yin, that there is the internal activism as well as the external activism. And the internal activism has a lot to do with what I already spoke about, which has to do with our commitment, our internal commitment to these principles that matter. You know, spirituality is not a separate category. It's not like over here is health and over here is work and career, over here are relationships and over here is politics and over here is spirituality. Spirituality is the platform on which we stand. It is a sense of who we are as people. And so to leave politics out of our sense of the spiritual is a very convenient cop-out, actually, is what it is. The truth of the matter is, if anything should be spiritual, then everything should be spiritual, because all that spiritual means is infused with the truth of who we are, and that is love. The problem with politics in America today is that it is based on a conversation which is basically obsolete. It carried us through the 20th century, but it's very mechanistic, it's very rationalistic, and it very much has to do with seeing society as a machine. And the idea in the predominant political paradigm is the idea that if you tinker with the machines, somehow we'll make it all better. You tinker with the economy over there, you know, you tinker with the government over here. But the more we have a conversation which is only external, the more we find ourselves watering the leaves, but never watering the roots of our democracy. Because society isn't a machine. Society is a group of individuals with hearts, with feelings, with hopes, with dreams. So we have to infuse politics. You know, sometimes people in the spiritual community think somehow politics is too toxic. Well, it's too toxic because we're not in there. If, you know, our job is to bring forward a more enlightened conversation, not to avoid some situations because they're not an enlightened conversation. So, as I said, the foundational principles of the United States are profoundly enlightened, that all men are created equal. That because at the deepest level, the reason we're equal is because at the deepest level, none of us are black or white or male or female, or you know, we are all one. That is the metaphysical meaning. If there's only one begotten Son, there's only one of us here. When you realize that what you do to someone else, you do to yourself. You know, so it's all going to come back to you. It's all cause and effect. Look what's happening in Houston right now. We're talking at a time when these terrible floods have occurred. Well, if you continue to treat your planet with such lack of reverence, these monster storms are going to happen. The scientists have been telling us this. And look, I come from Houston, so don't give me this bit about Houston's always had storms. I, as a little girl, lived through Hurricane Carla. My mother's house was destroyed by Tropical Storm Allison. I understand the effect of storms. This is different. This is a different order. I understand that Houston overbuilt. I understand it got rid of the green spaces. I understand that. But this is a different order of monstrous. And we need to talk about this in terms of cause and effect, and to face the fact that our lack of reverence towards the planet, our lack of reverence towards life itself, our lack of reverence, period, is what has created within our civilization situations and effects and consequences which are soulless, which do not honor our soul because we did not bring our soul into the process. And our soul is our love. So no, my loving you is not enough. My loving my own children is not enough. The love that will save us is the love also for the children on the other side of town, children on the other side of the world. And that's the we. You know, we cannot just live with blinders. You know, your life is fine, especially in the spiritual community, all about me getting what I want. It's really become, you know, some of the greatest toxicities in our own crowd here. I'm sorry. You know, the high spiritual mountaintop is not that you can manifest what you want. Because if all we're doing is, that's just playing along with the same mentality that got us to this place. You know, me, 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 me. You know, in human body, every cell collaborates with every other cell to serve the healthy functioning of the whole, the organ and the organism of which they're a part. And when any cell decides, I don't want to contribute to the healthy functioning of the pancreas or the lungs, I want to go do my own thing, that's a malignancy. And that is a malignancy in consciousness as much as a malignancy in the body. These patterns are universal, they are everywhere. And that is what has happened to the human race. We have been infected by a malignant consciousness. It's all about me as a malignant consciousness. And so we now, you know, when you have 12,000 children on the planet starving every day, starving to death every day, global poverty, you know, when you look at large groups of desperate people anywhere on the planet, whether they are in your own city or a corner of the city of the United States or anywhere in the world, we should see this as a national security risk because desperate people do desperate things. And desperate people become more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. So you think you can just continue to live your life just thinking about yourself, that's going to all blow back at you. This is just the law of cause and effect. And this is as true. And the law of cause and effect holds whether it's an individual life or in our collective existence. That is what people are beginning to understand. So this movement from a me consciousness to a we consciousness is not just nice. It is the only sustainable option. Now, some people would say to that, well, we don't want to be a socialist society. Well, first of all, there's a lot of ignorance there because there are many socialist democracies. I think it is important, and it's true. We like the fact that this rugged individualist high side, that is what we love about America. But it doesn't have to be an either or. It can definitely be an both and. As someone who has had successful books, and I'm very grateful to our community because it has given me this privilege, I understand what it is to be in the club. And if you're in the club in America, where basically you can make it here, there's no place like it. the crisis we have in America today is that not enough people can make it into the club. It's like if you have in the body, too much of the blood goes to just one area of the body, that would be very unhealthy. There's not enough distribution of opportunity. And this is what happens when you don't have universal health care. This is what happens when you have all these young people who are just so burdened by these college loans that they can't, too many people are living in economic despair. And people living in economic despair can't live at their best, can't soar, can't spread their wings, including can't contribute to the economy the way they would like to. So what we have done is over the last few decades, is to create a political order that is basically a handmaiden to an economic viewpoint, which says, let's take the majority of our resources and put them in the hands of a very few people, and everybody else is living under a kind of soft economic tyranny. Well, what that means is that we have subconsciously recreated a condition of aristocracy. You know, we call it corporatocracy or plutocracy, but the point is, archetypally, it's an aristocracy. The point of founding of this country was to overthrow that. And we have allowed ourselves to acquiesce to a situation in which we are drawn back into it. Except in this case, many of the serfs, the economic serfs, are voting for the aristocrats. So I don't understand what all that's about, but I do. It's called propaganda, and billions of dollars spent on that propaganda.
I totally get it. So we have created this hierarchical model of society that is not working.
Not only, and I think it's important to remember, it's not only that it's not working, it's not what American democracy was supposed to be about. American democracy was supposed to be based on the idea that all men are created equal, that it didn't matter what your parents said, it didn't matter what your class was. You would get an education, free public education, that you would have an opportunity. You know, in an aristocratic society, the social agreement was that only a few people were entitled. They were the only ones entitled to land. They were the only ones entitled to education. They were the only ones entitled to any hope that they or their children could do better. And this was the whole point of the founding of American democracy, was to completely overthrow that mentality. But we have recreated it. And once again, let's go back to the foundational principles. All men are created equal. That everybody's supposed to have a shot at it here. You can't tell somebody to pick themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't even have boots. You know, you have to give people, there has to be enough of a level playing field. And then once people have the education, once people aren't straddled by these college loans, once people have, you know, the same thing that every other advanced democracy has, which is access to healthcare, so many people live in this place where they can't get out of, they're just stuck in this permanent underclass. This is not what American democracy is supposed to be. There are too many people with great ideas, with great hopes, with great dreams, who are stuck in these like very low paying fast food jobs, et cetera, that used to just be, you know, just kids out of high school. And there's a reason for this. There are very specific economic and social and political policies that made that happen, where we have taken a few multinational corporate industries and banks and basically let them run the show, and have, because of the undue influence of money on our politics, they've basically been able to buy politicians who basically do their bidding. And this is why there's such a revolutionary mentality. There, you know, John F. Kennedy said, we will have peaceful evolution. Those who hold back peaceful evolution make violent revolution inevitable. The last thing we want in this, the last thing we want is a violent revolution in this country. The very thought of it is totally horrifying. But we must have peaceful evolution. And it is the citizens of this country who must bring it forth. Since we cannot overthrow Citizens United at the moment, because we have a president who has appointed a Supreme Court justice who would not wish to do that, really the only way to override this at the moment is through a massive citizen involvement and participation in our elections, the likes of which we've never seen. Usually in the United States, people show up, even on a presidential election, not as much as in other nations, but people do tend to show up for the presidential elections more than not. But we have to show up for the midterms now. These midterms in 2018 are absolutely everything. And there are voter suppression efforts being proactively supported both on the state level and now with this voter fraud commission, which is just a cover for voter suppression commission. The people have to be hip to this, and people have to People have to make sure not only that they vote in the 2018 elections, but that we are participatory in helping candidates, even if they're not in our own area or our own state, who would make a difference. So for me, Rick, the point is, if we are going to talk about spirituality and politics, we have to move beyond just some of the flowery language. I wrote Healing Soul of America in 1998. Okay, we've got the flowery language. Now and if we're going to talk about spirituality and politics, then we also have to get to the political conversation and get some dirt under our fingernails. I think those of us in the spiritual community should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. We shouldn't be like too ditzy to get into the weeds.
There you go. You're walking the talk.
Thank you.
Which is really great. So, I think many people who are considering the path that they are on would be very interested to hear you talk about your own spiritual journey. So starting with who inspired you when you were growing up, how would you describe the journey you've been on? And in particular, what can you say about the transitions you have made and about making transitions in general?
Probably the person who inspired me the most growing up was my father. I've lived a life. This goes back to what you were saying before. Individual lives matter. I'm a big reader of biography. But in terms of my own life, if there's anything unique about it, in a way, it's that it's nothing unique at all. The phases I've been through are the phases that everybody I know has been through. There's nothing, the Course in Miracles says all of the children of God are special and none of the children of God are special. My story isn't special. And as you are saying with this program, it's not about the story of me that really matters at this point, so much as the story of we.
Yeah, there you go. So how would you say that the journey that you're on connects with your recent bestseller, Tears to Triumph, Spiritual Healing for the Modern Plagues of Anxiety and Depression? That sounds like that really relates to everything we're talking about.
The dominant psychotherapeutic paradigm of our time is, once again, increasingly obsolete for the very reason you and I have been talking about. It focuses on me. You go into therapy and the therapist says, what's going on with you? What's happening in your life? When much of the anxiety that we feel is actually, if we move all the way into the most causal level, is about the we. For instance, somebody will say, well, I'm having a hard time paying my bills, or my husband is very stressed at work because he lost his job. So you think that you're upset because of what's going on in your marriage because your husband lost his job, when really dig down deeper, it's the collective situation of economic injustice and economic disparity.
Right.
So once again, we have to realize that so much of the anxiety that people feel, people say that they have an anxiety disorder. Who doesn't? In terms of the depression today, well, look around you. If you're looking around what's happening on the planet today between North Korea and ISIS and Houston and so forth, if you're not depressed, what? Are you not looking? Of course we're depressed. This is very, very sobering times we are living in. But what has happened, of course, is that the pharmaceutical industry has medicalized normal human despair. Well, that's great for them. They're now making billions of dollars off a new profit center called This Particular Human Suffering. So there is once again a normal spectrum of human despair that is not mental illness. It is not mental illness. When you lost your money, or you had a heartbreak, or whether it's a professional failure or a divorce, or someone that you love died, this is painful, but it is not a mental illness. And sometimes when things happen in our lives, whether it's happening to me or it's happening to us, the last thing we need to do is buffer ourselves because we are at the effect of a pharmaceutical, really it's propaganda that you should take this antidepressant because you will feel better. Some people say, well, you'll take the edge off while you're doing the work, but being with the edge is the work. And we have to face some things in ourselves when we're depressed. We have to face some things in our society. So this is not a time for anybody to be buffered from our pain. Now, I'm not talking about serious mental illness. I'm not talking about bipolar. I'm not talking about schizophrenia or anything like that. I'm talking about normal human despair, which is reasonable given the conditions of our time. So in a very real way, that book, Tears to Triumph, takes the conversation me to we into the conversation about our pain. It's not just your pain, it's our pain. Not just your anxiety, it's our anxiety. And the psyche has an immune system just like the body does.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Anyway, that's what that book is about.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds fabulous. Okay, let's talk about the power of collective awareness and action. With my organization, We the World, and our We campaign, we're working to achieve unprecedented cooperation and coordination between transformative grassroots organizations and visionary leaders like yourself to achieve peace, sustainability, and a cultural shift towards the we consciousness that we've been talking about and the common good, where the well-being of each individual and the entire web of life is prioritized as an absolute necessity for the well-being of all. So Marianne, what do you think is possible for our civilization? Do you think that we can actually make this shift towards we consciousness from individual attitudes all the way up through government policies? Do you think that is possible?
Well, first of all, what you're doing is what we're all doing and what everybody's doing in their own way. And I think it's important that we realize that. It's not just one organization, it's everybody's downloading the same gestalt. So it lets all of us move from me to we. It's not just what my organization or my book or my lectures. I mean, come on. It's what we're all a part of this great revolutionary spirit, and everybody's downloading it in their own way. Some people are trying to apply what you're talking about, working on soil and food issues. Some people are trying to do what you're talking about, working on urban planning issues. Some people are trying to do what you're talking about, working on political issues. Some people working on environment, but it's all the same. So I think we need to start with ourselves, right? Each and every one of us are holding the piece that is ours to hold. But no one person or one organization, we really need to get rid of Mecca complex wherever we see it. Now, when you say, is it possible? It is the only sustainable option. You know, we all grew up learning about how species evolve. And if a species gets to the point where their behavior is maladaptive for the survival of that species, it will either mutate or it will go extinct. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about an evolutionary leap or the destruction of Western civilization, possibly global civilization as we know it. So when you say, is it possible? If it's not possible, we're done. So I think, you know, I was hearing Sam Daly Harris talking the other day, and he was talking about the life of the optimist. You know, cynicism is easy. Cynicism is an excuse for not helping. We have to live into that possibility. We can't even indulge the question of whether or not it's possible. I mean, would it have been reasonable for the abolitionists to think that they could abolish slavery? No. It would not have been reasonable to consider it possible. Would it have been reasonable for the women suffragettes to consider the overthrow of that much patriarchal, misogynistic imprint on American politics possible? No, it would not have been reasonable to consider it possible. Would it have been reasonable for Martin Luther King and other people in the civil rights movement to consider the overthrow of an entire system of institutionalized white supremacy and segregation? No, it would not have been reasonable to consider it possible. Miracles and the miracle-minded perspective and spiritual perspective is not where you go for something because you can reasonably consider it possible. You go for it because it is the right thing to do. And because the meaning of your life lies in doing the right thing. But at this point, I think it's also important, and that's why, like I was talking about your organization, it is reasonable for us to realize that everybody's doing this. I mean, there are millions of us who are all downloading our piece. You're downloading your organization. I download mine. We're all, but it's important that we get that. No one organization can contain all this. No one book can contain all this. It is rather really a shift in consciousness of historical proportions. And much bigger than any one, you know, when you look at the Renaissance, you know, or you look even, you know, no one, you know, sometimes we get into the form. It's really the content, which is huge. And within that, I think, yes, I think the majority of people on the planet love. The majority of people on this planet are not haters. I think the majority of people in our country are lovers and not haters. But and if we're very honest with ourselves, you look at what's happened in our own country. Too many of us disengage from the political process. And the layers of accumulated disengagement led to the fact that we abdicated the field. We forgot that it is the responsibility of every generation to take these profound values and rights that were bequeathed to us and protect them and nurture them and foster them and expand them as a gift to the next generation. Too many of us were la-di-da, I'm just doing my own thing right now, and other people will handle that. Everything we're talking about is about me, not America. And so you abdicate that field, and 'twas always thus. Great, somebody else will be glad to take it up for you. So now the only way to counter that profound and ultimately very dangerous level of disengagement is through a level of engagement, the likes of which we've probably never seen in this country. So is it possible? Absolutely it's possible, but all of us have to get off our bums. All of us have to get active. All of us have to stop whining. You know, we're not the first generation to have some serious challenge. You know, and we're not the first generation to be traumatized. Oh my goodness. You think that the abolitionists were not traumatized by slavery? You think the women suffragettes were not traumatized by what they were going through? You think the civil rights marches, those people on that bridge at Selma were not traumatized? Please, our generation, we must get over ourselves at least for a couple of hours a day. You know, and in our own community, I mean, let's look at our own shadow here. I mean, too many people are saying, well, you know, what, when your trauma work is done? We don't have time to wait for you to finish your trauma work. We don't have time for you to just, so it's both and. It's yin and yang. I know this. I live a life at 24 hours in a day. Sometimes it's about my own personal relationships. Sometimes it's about my own personal pain, my own personal suffering, my own personal tears, my own personal character defects. It's in there. But there's another part of the day as well where I can show up for my community, show up for my friends and loved ones and family, and for my country and for my world. There are a lot of hours in the day.
Yep, and you are showing up here. Before we finish up, I want to remind people that Marianne lectures live every Tuesday night in New York City at the Marble Collegiate Church, which is located at 29th Street and 5th Avenue. And this is at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 Pacific Time. And I mention that because her talks are also live streamed. You have to register in advance and you'll have access to the video for 72 hours. For details, please visit marianne.com. In fact, for info on all of Marianne's events and activities, please visit marianne.com. So, wow, this has been really wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience and your being with us. Thank you so much, Marianne Williamson.
Thank you so much, honey. All my best.
Oh, same to you. And I also want to thank Wendy Zoller, the Shift Network team, and especially thank you all for listening and watching this. I hope you will join us for all the sessions of the 11 Days of Global Unity Telesummit. You can reach me, Rick Ulfik, and We the World by going to we.net. Let's expand we so much that there is no longer any them. Bye-bye.
Great one.
Thank you for joining us for the Summer of Peace, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more about our global community of people awakening to their divine humanity and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. To learn more about Summer of Peace, visit summerofpeace.net. You can also listen to past Summer of Peace recordings through the World Peace Library at worldpeacelibrary.com. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing this transformational peace-building wisdom with your friends and family.